So I know a number of you have been around here for many, many years, but some are fairly new around here. And you may or may not be aware that Riverton Baptist Community Church has had a partnership with Baptist Mission Australia going back decades. We've been involved with missions, global missions, for decades. And over the years, Rivo members have responded to God's call to global missions either through praying for our missionaries, through giving generously to support them overseas, or even some of our members have actually gone overseas. Dozens of our people have taken short-term global exposure trips with Baptist Missions Australia. In January, just gone, Eric Martin and Andrew led a team of young adults to Africa and experienced the work that we're involved with over there. And in September, Pastor Kenny is leading a team of 10 up to Thailand to experience the work with Glenn and Liz up in Thailand later this year. And on top of that, we're supporting 7 long-term intercultural workers in those places, in Africa and in Thailand. And 5 of those 7 are actually members of our church that we've sent out over the years. And that's what we're doing officially as a church. And I know unofficially, I know many of you are engaged in missions, are deeply involved in missions. We have representatives in our church who work for OMF. I know a number of us are supporting Jim and Robin Nottingham's work up in Port Moresby. And a sizable number of our congregation are actually returned missionaries. It's fascinating. We have missionaries who've served with SIM, Interserve, European Christian Mission, WEC, Wycliffe and other agencies. And so Riverton has a proud heritage of people responding to Jesus and his Great Commission. And now it's Missions Month. And with that heritage and that history, forgive me if I feel like I'm preaching to the converted here. Because we're deeply invested, aren't we, in global missions. Am I preaching to the converted? Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. But as we consider our call to missions, what I want us to think about this morning is, how can we stay responsive to Jesus? We've been a church that's known for its response to missions, but how can we stay responsive to Jesus going forward? Because responding to Jesus, it's not about a one-time decision, is it? Responsiveness to Jesus is meant to be more like an attitude of the heart that we walk in every day. It's about being available to Jesus at any moment, at any time of the day. I recently switched phone providers, and while that's saving us a few dollars each month, I've picked up a whole bunch of spam phone calls with that. So some of you have experienced a similar thing, right? Well, I have stopped responding to unknown phone numbers. My policy is that I don't answer numbers that I don't know. And if it is someone I do know, then I figure if it's really that important, they'll either leave a voice message or send me a text, or they'll phone Jody and say, why isn't one answering his phone? But they'll get through to me somehow if they know me and if it's really important. But invariably, none of those phone calls are followed up with a text. No, they're just interested in having a chat to me about selling me anything from wine to insurance, whatever it is that they're flogging that day. No one leaves a text afterwards. We all respond to countless demands on our life, don't we? On our time and on our life. We respond to text messages, we respond to the alarm clock in the morning, we respond to traffic lights, we respond to life's challenges. And sometimes we don't really have a lot of choice about the things that we respond to. If your family has a need, you respond. You get up and fix it. If a client calls you at work, you pick up the phone, you respond. If you get hungry or you get thirsty, well, that's something I hope you respond to. I certainly do. And if the weather becomes cooler, you go to the closet and you pull out a jacket. You respond to a change in the weather. And so we're responding to circumstances around us all the time. And each time we do make a response, we're making a judgment call about our availability. Like my spam phone calls. I've chosen to not be available to people who want to spam me and sell me stuff. I've made myself unavailable for them, and I'm unwilling to engage with them. But what about when it comes to our faith? How available are we, and how willing are we to respond to Jesus when he calls? How responsive are you to Jesus? And in today's reading that Josiah brought us just a moment ago, we learn a few things from these two disciples about how they were available to Jesus and how responsive they were to his call. And we learn here that our response to Jesus is often part of a bigger picture. These two men, the two disciples, it's John, the writer of this gospel, and the other man is his friend, Andrew. They're described here as John the Baptist's disciples. And so as disciples of John the Baptist, they were already on a journey of learning and a journey of growth and change before they even met Jesus. They were already on a journey. That's their bigger picture. And it seems that over time, the Lord had been preparing those men to respond. And the Lord still works in those ways today. Whatever you might be going through right now, I wonder if you've ever considered that that might be the Lord using those circumstances to prepare you and to get you ready to respond to his call. You know, as I look back at my own life, I can see how the Lord's been preparing me, how the Lord's prepared me. I had my first leadership responsibility as a 12-year-old in Boys Brigade. They gave me a white lanyard, said put that around your neck, that identifies you as a leader. Here's these 5 boys, make sure their socks are pulled up and their uniforms are tidy and that they get to their activities on time. That was my first leadership responsibility. At school, I enjoyed languages, English, I enjoyed history, I enjoyed music, and all of those things are a great preparation for a pastor. After school, I had no idea I was going to be a pastor, of course. After school, I studied business and business management. I learned how to lead a staff team. I learned how to engage with the public and how to grow a business. And all of those things are helpful for a pastor. And at church, I was often asked to lead Bible studies, home groups, and to lead in ministries. Now, I could have done a load of different things with all of that. But decades later, as I look back, I can see how the Lord has given me those experiences and prepared me for that moment when he would ask me to respond. Or take Carla, for example. And that's not her real name. I can't use Carla's real name. She's a real person. But she's an intercultural worker with Baptist Missions Australia. And she works in a creative access nation in the Silk Road. So I can't use her real name. But her journey into missions began years ago. And she tells a story of how at the age of 16, she went to a church camp and she was challenged by what the speaker said. And at that time, she responded to God's call on her life. As I was reading her story, she says this. She says, I prayed a scary prayer at that camp. I said that my life was God's. If he told me what he wanted me to do with it, I would do it. No asterisk, no footnote, no take-backs. And then in the story, she goes on to explain that that decision was 12 years ago. And that each of the following 12 years of her life have been a preparation for the work that she's doing now with Baptist Mission Australia on the Silk Road. And at each turn, she had to choose again to be available to Jesus. Do you see how our responsiveness is often part of a bigger picture in our lives? And so what about your life? How has the Lord been preparing you to respond to him? Ask yourself, is responsiveness to Jesus, is that the primary attitude of your heart? And maybe today is a moment of decision for you. Whatever the Lord is calling you to do it, I want to urge you just to do it. Don't delay. Just step out and do it if the Lord's calling you to it. Or maybe today the Lord is reminding you to cultivate a heart of responsiveness to him. A heart that is willing to follow him and available to follow him wherever he leads. Back in John chapter 1, Jesus' first words to John and Andrew, they were a question. He asked them this: what do you want? It's a pretty simple question, isn't it? What do you want? They interrupted him and turned around and says, yep, what do you want? Now this is a call for a response. Jesus is calling them to respond. He was forcing them to question and to define what their goal was. What's your goal? And he was challenging them to think through what their purpose was. What's your goal and your purpose? And if we want to be people who are responsive to Jesus, that's a very good question. What do you want? Why are you here? What are you seeking in life? Why has God put you on the planet? What's your goal? What's your purpose? Why are you here? What do you want? And John and Andrew's response, they respond in a really good way. It opens up a way for them to spend the rest of the day with Jesus. And as it turns out, to spend the rest of their life with Jesus. And so when we become disciples of Jesus, he invites us to be with him. You see, discipleship it's not primarily about studying the Bible. It might include that. It's not about reading books, although it might include that. Discipleship is about walking through life being with Jesus, being close to him, being available to him, listening to him, responding to him. That's discipleship. It involves spending time with Jesus, learning from him, and growing in relationship to him. And so if we want to stay responsive to Jesus in a world that's full of noise and distractions and constant demands on our time, then we have to be intentional about creating space in our lives to be with Jesus and to seek his presence intentionally. So we want to seek to develop a heart and a life that's attentive and responsive to him. And we might do that in a number of different ways. To carve out time by having a daily quiet time, spending time at church in worship, or taking a spiritual retreat, or joining a life group. However it comes, let's carve out time intentionally to seek the presence of Jesus, to live attentively to him and be willing to respond, to cultivate a heart of responsiveness. Now, of course, to do that, we have to be willing to accept change, don't we? And again, John and Andrew, they show us this. We read there in the next few verses, in verses 38 and 39. It says there, they said, Rabbi, which means teacher, where are you staying? Come, he replied, and you'll see. And so they went and saw where he was staying, and they spent the day with him. These two guys immediately dropped everything they were doing. They dropped all their plans and followed Jesus. They were willing to change their plans in order to respond to Jesus. I wonder if you're willing to change your plans to respond to Jesus. You might have a plan for your life. You might have a plan for today. You might have a schedule you're working through today. Coming to church is number one. What are you willing to change your plans to follow Jesus? A moment ago, I just said to you, if the Lord Jesus is calling you to something, just do it. Don't wait. Are you willing to change your plans, to drop everything and to do what the Lord is calling you to do? You see, following Jesus implies movement, doesn't it? The word follow implies movement. It implies change. Being available and responsive to Jesus means movement, momentum, and change. All of those things are inevitable. If we're going to be on mission with Jesus, then that means change. You know, Jesus never asked us to go on mission for him. He only ever asked us to go on mission with him. So as you think about that change, you won't be alone. Jesus calls us to go on mission with him, not for him. Our passage today says that they spent the day with him. And in the Great Commission, Jesus says, go and make disciples of all nations. But then he closes by saying, I will be with you always. I will be with you always, even to the very end of the age. And so what would it look like for you to drop everything and follow Jesus, to be with him, to follow him today? You know, it may not look like what you think it's going to look like. 30 years ago, Jody and I, as we're just entering into pastoral ministry, we were involved in replanting a church, and there was a whole bunch of young married people who'd just joined this old dying church, and our task was to replant and revitalise this church. Jeff Charlton was there. Jeff was there, and I know many of you know Dean and Stacey Gallagher. They were there as well in this group. And we were looking for ways that we could reconnect this church community with the community that was around it. We needed to build relationships with people who lived in the local community who were far from Jesus. And then the senior pastor came to us and he suggested that we put on boot scooting classes. Can you imagine? Now, I dance like an unbalanced washing machine on a spin cycle. I was not excited about that idea, not in the slightest. But we did it. We all bought shirts with a logo on it. We put up an advert. In those days it was in the newspaper. And do you know what? We filled that church with people who wanted to learn boot scooting. I couldn't believe my eyes. And there we were, teaching people how to line dance to Billy Ray Cyrus and Achy Breaky Heart. But you know what? I can tell you today that some of those people pursued faith. They joined us in exploring the Christian faith, and today some of those people are in the kingdom because we chose to follow Jesus and the senior pastor and teach boot scooting of all things. I wonder what it would look like for you to drop what you're doing to follow Jesus today. It might look like taking a week off work and coming along to help us run our kids club in July. It might look like delaying your winter holiday for a week so that you can be here to help us run our kids club in July. You know, we open registrations on Thursday. We've already got 30 kids. I don't know if you know the story, but last year we opened up to 60. We hit 60 really quickly. And we ended up with 110, I think it was, or 120 kids, twice as many as what we were expecting. It was a real stretch. And so we've got 30 already, and registration's only been open 4 days. So we really need your help. Maybe that's what the Lord is calling you to. Joining Jesus, being open and available to him, it might look to you like joining the launch team that's going to go over to High Wycombe eventually and replant the work over there. It might look like committing a Wednesday evening to helping young girls at our Girls Brigade to learn about Jesus. It might mean committing a Thursday morning to come along and to teach a craft or to teach in our English class and to help people build connections with the church and to find Jesus. It might look like to you enrolling in a Bible unit at Morling College, just to explore what that might look like, just to take the next gentle step to explore what that might look like. Or it could be as simple as being willing to pause at work and to listen to a co-worker who's just opened up to you on a deep level. The point is, are you available to go wherever Jesus leads you? And to do whatever Jesus calls you to do? No questions asked, no footnote, no asterisk. That's what it means to respond to Jesus, to simply be available and then see what he's going to do. Responding to Jesus means being willing to go wherever he leads, even if it means boot scooting. And then Jesus also said to John and Andrew, he said, come and see. Come and see. He wanted them to respond. They said, where are you going? He said, well, come and see. And I want to suggest to you today that if you truly want to see Jesus doing amazing things in your life and through your life, then you have to cultivate a heart of responsiveness. And you have to carve out space in your life to be available to him. It's very hard to respond to Jesus if you are too busy and distracted to be available to him. So do you have time to be available to Jesus? This week I came across this meme online. Ben Smoke says this, I simply do not understand how it is humanly possible to stay on top of exercising and eating and cleaning and washing and admin and work and keeping in contact with people while also having time to sleep and rest. How are the rest of you people doing this? And then the number one comment underneath that was, if you're scrolling through social media, you have more time on your hands than you know. It's hard, isn't it, to carve out time. It's hard to respond to Jesus if you're too busy and distracted to be available to him. So are you willing to go wherever Jesus leads? And are you even available to respond to him when he calls? You see, being available to respond to Jesus is an essential posture of the heart of a productive disciple. Your responsiveness and availability to Jesus, it's critical to his mission. The Apostle Paul says why in Romans 10. He says this, how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they've never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how will anyone go and tell them without being sent? Friends, unless God's people are responsive and available, then those who are far from Jesus just simply will not hear the good news. The Lord still wants his lost children found, and he wants them welcomed into his family. You know, when it comes to mission, whether that mission is local missions here around us or global missions, the biggest problem in missions, the biggest hurdle and hold up in missions today, it's not money. The biggest hurdle to missions today, it's not mobility, it's not mastery, it's not methodology. The greatest threat to missions today is motivation. It's our motivation. And I want you to write that down. That's your social post for today. The greatest threat to missions in the world today is motivation. We lack a sense of urgency. And the trouble with motivation is that it's intrinsic. It's in here, it comes from here, doesn't it? In the heart. You see, everything else, all of those other threats, we can overcome those. Money's not a threat, we can get that. The Lord owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Money's not a problem to missions. Mobility, that's not a problem. In the world today, we can get you where you need to be, anywhere in the world, probably within 24 hours. So mobility is not a problem. Mastery is not a problem. I don't know how many Bible colleges there are in Perth. There's loads. There's plenty of opportunity for you to go and master the skills you need to be on mission. Training's available to anyone who wants to take it. Methodology is not the problem. We have missions models and methodologies coming out of our ears. The church has been doing mission for 2,000 years. We know how to do this. So methodology is not the problem. The greatest threat to mission today is motivation. And here's why. No one can help you with that except you. Because it comes from here, doesn't it? It comes from the heart. Because your motivation for mission comes from who you are. It comes from your heart. It's intrinsic. It comes from within you. Your motivation for mission is birthed out a heart of compassion for those who are lost and without hope in the world. So do you love the lost? Because that's where our motivation comes from. And so friends, what can you do today to turn up the dial on your heart of compassion? Let's be the kind of disciples that stay responsive, that have a heart that's hot with compassion for the lost and those who are without hope. Let's stay responsive to Jesus. Let's stay available to him and his mission to the lost. Perhaps for you in your life, there's a neighbour or a co-worker or a family member, or perhaps there's a people group on your heart in the world, and they need your time, they need your availability to be with them, to listen to them, and to share the love of Jesus with them. Remember, responding to Jesus is not just about what we know. It's about a relationship. It's about obedience. It's about availability. It's about sharing his love with others. And so my challenge to us this morning is that we be faithful disciples who are available to respond to his call.